You're watching TVP World's special coverage from the Globsec Forum in Prague, and joining me now is Mikhail Khodorkovsky, founder of the Russian Anti-War Committee and former Russian businessman and political prisoner. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Sir, you know Vladimir Putin better than most. Will he ever make peace in Ukraine?
There will definitely be no peace, but there could be a ceasefire.
Take me inside Vladimir Putin's head. What is he thinking right now, more than 3 years into this invasion in Ukraine?
Currently, he thinks he's winning, and he thinks the West is tired.
Talk to me then about what Donald Trump is trying to gain by seeming to give Vladimir Putin the benefit of the doubt, by playing both sides.
Trump tried to offer what I think was a very good deal to Putin. But the way Putin thinks is that if he's being offered a good deal, but he's not being threatened at the same time, then it means that he could get an even better deal. And this is why the deal did not happen.
So, with Vladimir Putin, the only option is force?
Yes, I think that at this stage, only force can help solve this issue, and then the talks will follow.
Do you agree with the current sanctions regime on Russia?
I do believe that the sanctions are working, but I think the entire approach to sanctions is not entirely correct.
Why is that?
Well, the first reason is the administrative load. It's very hard to administer all these packages of sanctions. The second reason is that the sanctions are not fulfilling the strategic goal that they have in mind, or two goals rather. The first goal is to weaken the Russian war machine. This is something that the sanctions are partially successful in achieving. And the second goal is to divide the Kremlin and the Russian population. And this is something that the sanctions have not managed to achieve yet.
So are the sanctions an effective deterrent for President Putin? Or what else would you suggest that would deter Mr. Putin?
I'm convinced that right now, the only thing that Putin will understand are weapons. And when that happens, the next day, when he realizes that the path of war is now finished for him, then there will be an opportunity to start the talks.
I want to also ask about frozen Russian assets. Polish Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski has suggested using those frozen Russian assets to fund arms for Ukraine, to fund military capabilities in Ukraine. Is that something you would agree with?
I believe the freezing of Russian assets is not a very effective step, but it is a step that is just. Why I think they are not very effective is that when the assets were frozen, mistakes have been made that led to the fact that economically it didn't hurt Russia that much. They still have access to the funds they need. I think that confiscating the money directly would not be the best way to do it. I mean, it would be the easiest way, but the easiest way is not always the right way, because there is the whole question of private property that you have to deal with, and that is much larger than Putin. So I think that using the other methods that were suggested, like using a certain percentage or using these frozen assets as guarantees for something, these parts are more complicated, but I think they are more right in this context.
You've spoken repeatedly about how Putin only understands military force. So is it a positive step for NATO and the EU to invest heavily in its own defense?
I think that using military power is a necessary path to victory right now. The European Union needs to show unity that they can defend themselves, and they will defend themselves. So this will be the deterrent for Putin. This will convince him that he should not test the European Union, and NATO obviously.
You shared a message on social media around Donald Trump's inauguration, and I quote, "America are not all that invested in some war in far-off Eastern Europe. We might not agree with all of these views or priorities, but this is what Americans chose for themselves." Can Europe still trust America on defence?
Unfortunately, the things that are happening now seriously undermine the trust of the entire world, not just the EU or Europe in America. Well, I perfectly understand that the US does not want to always be responsible for the entire world and its well-being, to be the world police, but to deal with their inner issues, for instance. But at the same time, the way the world works today, the way that it is globalized, the US cannot afford to ignore the rest of the world, what's happening beyond their borders. They cannot ignore their allies. They cannot ignore their responsibilities. So that is the situation, and it is also related to what the situation is inside of America.
I guess the question is, do you think Europe, especially Central Eastern Europe, the eastern flank, the Baltic nations, the Nordic nations, Poland, that they can be confident that if Putin were to attack, that this NATO security guarantee that America is part of would hold, that America would come support, let's say Poland, in the case of an attack?
Well, Putin clearly thinks that if something like that were to happen, the Americans will not get involved, which, of course, makes it easier for him to eventually make such a decision. Personally, I don't know how reliable America will be and how ready it will be to protect its allies.
But do you feel like it is more unreliable with President Trump than perhaps previously?
Trump was definitely the first to say it out loud that they probably wouldn't, or maybe wouldn't, support their allies unconditionally, as it were. He was the first to say that there would have to be some conditions that need to be met for the US to come to its allies' aid. So this makes the whole situation very blurred and, of course, it means a great deal for the Kremlin, because it makes the situation very beneficial to them.
I want to come back to Russia. Can you see Russia, Moscow, having a democratic future in the near future? Let's say in the next 2 decades, 20 years. Do you have any timeline for when perhaps Russia might have a functioning Western democracy?
There is a saying in Russian that goes something like, "The ship of Russian statehood sinks as soon as it reaches the calmest waters."
What do you mean by that?
What I mean by that is that Russia did come very close to having a Western-like democracy, but the way Putin managed to change Russia in the past 25 years, it will take at least another 20 years to undo this change and to go back to where we were. But of course, the sooner we start, the better.
Do you rue that past? Do you regret that Russia was, as a country, on the brink of this kind of globalism, and then Putin took it in this other direction?
I was one of the people in 1991 who was there with Yeltsin protecting our White House in Moscow. My entire life I have been fighting for democracy, but you know, this is the way life is sometimes. And of course, I didn't plan to dedicate my life to this fight. It just sort of happened to me. But I will say that I would love to see Russia get back on this path toward a Western-style democracy.
Mikhail Khodorkovsky, thank you so much again. I really appreciate it. And that's all for this exclusive interview here from the Globsec Forum in Prague. Do stay with us on TVP World. I'm Dahmen. Goodbye for now.